Welcome to Content Disrupted, bold takes on brand marketing. I'm your host, Dan Baptiste, and together we'll explore what it takes to excel in brand marketing at one of the most exciting and disruptive times in industry history. Welcome to Content Disrupted. Today, we're in for a treat as we get to have a far-reaching conversation with Michael Smith, the Chief Marketing Officer at NPR. Michael's had a rich career in helping build, launch, and drive audiences to passion-led media properties. Prior to NPR, Michael helped launch the Cooking Channel, ran his own consulting company where he advised prominent brands like Condé Nast Entertainment, and even spent more than 10 years helping lead marketing, creative, and brand strategy for the Food Network. Michael offers great perspectives on building passionate, diverse audiences and crafting deliberate content ecosystems to do so. We'll talk about finding your voice as a brand in a complicated environment, connecting with audiences in meaningful ways, and where the all-important AI can and can't help in that process. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Stan. Great to be here.
Yeah, we're thrilled to have you. And to that intro, you've had what I'd imagine is a really fun path or career so far, still going strong here. Can you talk us through how you got here, maybe how you got into the space and what you've learned along the way that maybe shaped the perspectives that you hold today?
Yeah, I guess if we want to go all the way back to why I got into marketing itself is that I've always just been fascinated by the communications around why people should buy things. My personal interest just as a consumer was really entertainment. I loved media and entertainment. I was a huge TV watcher. The thing that I was most fascinated by, even more than the shows, were the announcements that got people to watch the shows. Just again, back to that, just being a nerd of why were they promoting or talking about this show being better than that show? And why every fall, this is back in the days of broadcast TV, they would launch the new, what they call fall season, and they would have these really advertisements to promote the new programs. So this interest in TV and media and then marketing have always been there. And when I was a college student, I studied something called science, technology, and society, which is a blend between communications and engineering and technology. Because I was also very interested in technology as well. So I worked for a company called Young and Rubicam Advertising as an account manager. And it was really great training in terms of just basic brand marketing. And then after a couple of years, I was able to get my foot in the door at CBS TV and spent a couple of years there. And then went to a relatively new company at the time called the Disney Channel, which is a kids TV channel. And I worked in marketing and branding for Disney Channel for about 8 years. I think the thing that's most exciting is working on brands that are in that sort of formation or that early emergent stage. That's where you're less in the mode of trying to protect the brand or fight for share, but you're actually trying to define what the brand could be. And so there's a recent startup company called the Food Network that actually didn't even have a marketing department at the time. It was, I think, the second year, third year of operation when I joined and became the first creative director, brand director, and spent the next 20 years at the company that owned Food Network called Scripps Networks. Through the years, there was HGTV as part of our portfolio. We had Travel Channel. I was involved in launching a channel called Cooking Channel. And then near the end of my time, I worked on streaming versions of food and home and travel type content. And then the company was sold to Warner Discovery. And I left it's been about 4 or 5 years now. The lesson I've learned was that it's always good to be in a space within media where the technology is on the emergent side. That's where the growth is. That's where you're going to find new jobs, more interesting opportunities. So when I got out of college, broadcast was mature, but cable was coming up. So I spent a lot of time at Disney Channel and Food Network, Cooking Channel. And when I left the cable industry, the audio space, especially podcasting or what you call digital audio, was really having a moment and still is. And I came over to NPR a little over 4 years ago and have been really enjoying that relationship between technology and content. NPR is a 50-year-old broadcast radio company, but it is finding exciting new life as a digital audio company in the podcasting space.
And as you've gone through this journey, particularly hopping in at like the early stage of these media companies where really you're trying to align around a passion or a shared vision, any commonalities or things you've learned in going from some of these stops? And you've worked with some of the more recognizable brands and networks, period, around the world. So what have you learned that kind of helped put you in a better position today as you're thinking about doing it at NPR?
Well, I think that one of the common threads is that it's all about understanding the audience opportunity and identifying a specific audience that you want to target. And that audience may not be immediately evident. It takes a lot of research and talking to the audience and then looking at the overall media landscape to find opportunities. Example would be Food Network. The initial audience opportunity, I think everyone thought was, oh, it's a cooking channel that teaches people how to cook. I guess the target should be people that read cookbooks or read food magazines that like to cook. And that's what we should be branding it and marketing it for. But if you take a step back and say, well, wait a minute, what's really going on the screen? It's television that is about real things. It's storytelling about a real life experience, which is making food. But there's much more than just an instructional manual on how to make food. It's tapping into the curiosity for storytelling about real things. And we noticed in the early 2010s, that kind of TV about real things was really having a moment, starting with Survivor, or even going back to the real world, MTV. People call it reality TV, but TV about real things was really happening. And so Food Network thought the opportunity around making television about real life experiences around food rather than teaching people to cook. So our audience target is really not people looking to make meals, but people looking for interesting storytelling around real life experiences. And so we broadened the aperture of what the channel could be. And then we started creating programming that tapped into those interests. So things like Chopped and Iron Chef, or shows that are really more about the competitive storytelling than they are about here's how you make an omelet. And that was the insight that helped take the network from being a very modestly watched, we were, I think, with the 50th ranked cable network, to a top 10 network with millions and millions of viewers. And people who, were not chefs, who just love to watch the shows because they're just fun and exciting to watch. So that was a key lesson, is like the reason why for your brand. It may not be what you initially think it is.
I'd love to dig into that more in a little bit, because I think that's really important when you think of getting to something unique, interesting, and aligned to the audience, really how to do that and even how to dig for it. Most of the time, it can feel very linear, especially in this sort of data-driven environment. We're like, hey, it says we need to create about Y, so let's create about Y, instead of saying like, all right, let's figure out what our position is on why and what the audience cares about, and start to figure out an intersection so we have something unique and interesting to say versus just follow the sort of paint by number. So I'd love to dig into that in a moment. But before we go there, I'd love to understand what your charter is today as you're thinking about why you were hired at NPR and what's job number one as you think about audience growth and how that aligns or doesn't align with programming and some of the concepts you just referenced.
Yeah, I think for NPR, the first step is to take a step back and think about what our mission is. And we go back to the key strategic axiom of where to play and how to win. And so where are we playing and what should our strategy be in each of those places? So at NPR, we play in three different spaces. Traditionally, we have been a broadcast radio news provider for 264 different local stations around the country. That's why public media at PBS and NPR were chartered back in the late 1960s, was to help educational and community-based public radio and television stations have a source of high quality national programming. And we're still fulfilling that need. And there was a belief back then, and I think it still exists today, that if you look at the broadcast radio dial, there is a scarcity of high quality news and informational programming. There's a lot of music on the radio. There's a lot of sports talk shows. There's a lot of political talk shows, religious shows. But in terms of high quality news and information, that's something that the free market was not providing. And so that's why the Public Broadcasting Act set aside funding to do that. And that's what we provide, and PBS does on the TV side. So that continues. And even as people think that radio might be dying because of technology, the truth is actually the opposite of that. Radio is still thriving. It's still listened to by 230 million people every week. There's been gradual decline in radio consumption. I think last year was maybe off 1%, but it's not in any kind of free fall the way, let's say, cable TV consumption is. So that's our core business. And we are the number one producer of news and information in the radio space. Our stations in many markets are the number one news talk station. So that business is still our number one most important thing. And that fulfills our mission to fill something that's scarce in broadcasting. So that's number one. Number two is, though, the digital audio space, what I call the on-demand audio space, which people would call podcasting, has been growing dramatically over the last 10 years as younger people are using their smartphones instead of AM, FM radios, and they choose to download audio episodes to listen to. And they also use YouTube to listen to conversations like what you and I are having. That's become a huge new opportunity. It's not, I would say, as mission based in the sense that there isn't a scarcity of educational and informational content the way there is in the broadcast sphere. But it's a great opportunity for the NPR brand to find new audiences and generate revenue that can actually help support the core mission and the core part of the business. And because we have such a trusted brand in audio, we operate the largest audio newsroom in the country. It's given us a great opportunity to go into the podcasting space and have a lot of success. And we do have two of the top 5 podcasts in the country are NPR podcasts, Up First and NPR News Now. We have other ones like Wait, Don't Tell Me and Planet Money and The Indicator, and Fresh Air. They're all top 20 podcasts. So we've had a lot of success in podcasting, and we continue to experiment and innovate and invest because that's a great place to generate revenue that supports the nonprofit and also expose ourselves to the next generation of audiences. We're not sure what the future holds for radio and audio consumption in general as technology evolves, but podcasting has really helped us find the next generation of audiences. And then the third space is what I would call the web, social media. You see a lot of news and informational content these days on websites, like whether it's Politico or BuzzFeed, or on social media platforms like Instagram and Facebook and YouTube. And a lot of news brands are in those spaces with short form video, or they have their news websites like the Washington Post. And so that's a space that because we have so much audio journalism that's very easily reimagined as text journalism, we can play in the print website space. We have a very popular website that generates almost 15 million weekly users. And then we adapt a lot of our content for the social video space as well. And those aren't as much revenue generating opportunities, but they are great sort of top of funnel reach opportunities for people to interact with the brand. And then hopefully we drive them down the funnel of discovering our podcasts or listening to our radio content.
So as you're building out this universe, if I unpack that a little bit, you're starting with some of these longer form assets and you're finding ways to extend that experience out. So from a podcast or a platform around a podcast or episode, now I can find ways to extend that into the web, extend that into social, and really start kind of pulling people into an own environment with the common themes that are centrally created in your newsroom. Is that how you're thinking about the ecosystem space in general?
Yeah, I think that like, for example, in the podcast space, there's many opportunities to pull short moments and highlights from podcast episodes, especially when you're doing something like an interview show like you and I are doing. It's inexpensive to add video, and then you can take a moment from that interview and turn it into an Instagram short or a YouTube short. And those small moments can then, maybe someone will go viral, but at least they will expose people to your content more. And then if they like it, hopefully they will come back and watch the entire episode and then follow or subscribe to the show.
Awesome. I want to talk about finding your voice, because you talked about that when you're at the Food Network and getting a unique insight about the audience that created a spark or unique insight of something cultural that's happening. And that allowed you to maybe change how you communicated with the market in that case, not only with Chop, but even I would imagine some of that more personality driven shows where you're following those chefs home in a lot of those programs and you're finding ways to tell stories beyond, to your point, the linear recipe creation. When you're thinking about finding a voice for NPR within the digital space and trying to attract younger audiences, how do you think about that? And does podcasting give you the flexibility to adjust maybe how you present topics for new and different audiences? Or how does that insight impact directly programming? Or does it just become a marketing challenge of like, how do I take this product and find different ways to position it for different audiences?
Well, I think going back to the Food Network experience of trying to find what's that unique selling proposition or job to be done, the different frameworks people use, the thing that you provide in consumers' lives. We try to do the same thing with NPR. And when I look at news and information content, I think of four primary jobs to be done that you find content touching. I look at it as there's know, understand, feel, and do. So there is news and information content that is purely about just telling you what's going on. The simplest would be like the Weather Channel. It's 80 degrees outside. It's going to rain. Just help me know stuff. Breaking news. This happened. There was a car crash. Then there's a second type of content, which is the understand part, which is put it in context. Okay, so it's 80 degrees. It's the record high today. What does that mean? Okay, well, that's where it might be a story about climate change, about the history of what's going on in global warming. So help me put things in context for me. And there's some media brands that do that really well. And I think that's the space that we live in. And then the third space is the part, which is the news and information or the informational content is not necessarily there for help me learn or know things or understand things, but it's just to make me feel something. And that's what I would call nonfiction storytelling. I think true crime is a great example of that. I don't think people are listening to true crime podcasts because they particularly need to know something or
Yeah.
but it's just the storytelling is compelling and entertaining. And so that's the sort of using information to make me feel something. And then the final thing is information that helps me do something, like a Dave Ramsey podcast. Like, where should I put my money in my 401k? How do I get a job? Like the podcast you're doing. How do I become a better marketer? So I think as an information provider, you have to think about what part in that ecosystem do you want to play? What do you want your brand promise to be? I think you can feel unfocused to consumers when you're trying to do all of those at the same time. And I think we at NPR see, particularly in podcasting, that we're not the no provider. We're not going to be the breaking news. You hear it here first, but we're the one that's going to help you understand and put it in context and take a deeper dive based on our expertise and also just talking to experts. And we try to really focus on what is our unique position. And we think that's a sustainable position, especially as technologies like AI make the no part of the information ecosystem take a bigger share and make it a little less available to media companies. We found that going back to Food Network, that being a source for food information and recipes and how to do things might have made sense in the late 80s and early 90s. But as the internet came, people weren't sitting and watching Julia Child to learn how to make something. They just type it in the internet and get a recipe. So if you're going to do food media, then we have to move to the context side, which is doing documentaries about what food culture or in the feel side, which is do competition shows, like people making cakes or making over restaurants. So I think media companies have to always see where that place they can play. And I think in the future, it's going to have to be more in that feel and understand space because you're going to be able to just talk to your phone
Mhm.
and get any immediate fact you want instantaneously. But the thing you won't be able to get as easily is to ask your phone, tell me a really compelling, interesting story about something that keeps me on the edge of my seat,
Yeah.
So at least for now.
It is wild. If you switched hats and imagine that you're a CMO in a brand versus a media company, and you had that same parameter list of know, understand, feel, and do, where would you play? Is there a kind of sweet spot for brands in that universe? I totally agree on the no side. Like brands tried to play there for a while from like an SEO standpoint. Could we just answer every question and show up? And now AI is gobbling up all of those searches and it almost forces you to add perspective and understanding and something unique to the conversation. But is there a recipe here for brand marketers beyond media companies that want to become a trusted advisor in the markets they operate in? Like, where should they play or where should they think about playing in that list that you described?
Yeah, I think it depends on the brand and what's really authentic and organic to your brand. If you're, Home Depot, then you probably would find it easier to play and partner with some influencers about how to build the perfect deck or kind of goofy videos about how to make a really cool Christmas tree decoration. Because the Home Depot brand, there's this sort of natural, organic sense that brand is about helping you do things. That may not be a fit for, say, Dove soap to be getting into the do part because the product's pretty basic, but maybe Dove would be better off in the sort of feel side. It's like, okay, it's a pretty generic kind of product, but there's something about self-esteem and confidence that comes from feeling clean. And you can think about, I think Dove did a few years ago, really go down that road with a whole campaign about being comfortable with your appearance and your body and how you look and celebrating the many different forms and shapes and sizes that beauty comes in. So I think that you have to look at your brand and see where that lane is. Because the challenge that brands have versus media companies, you think about content marketing, the key is to make content that people will engage with that also sells your brand. Because you can make something that's really all about your brand, but if nobody wants to watch it because it's not interesting, it doesn't work. Media brands have a little bit of an easier job because what we do is inherently content. You have IP that's a little easier. Like if you're marketing Barbie and you're showing clips from the movie, people are going to want to engage with them already. But if you're selling car insurance, it's a little harder. You have to then create more entertainment, which I guess is why they use geckos and, and
Yes.
everything else
Yeah.
to try to do that because it's more of a challenge.
I think where that connective thread comes in an interesting way is largely what you talked about, right? It would be easy to play in a very kind of linear, like do bucket for insurance as an example. It's harder to understand the audience and why insurance might matter and what is a unique insight and how do I rally a mission and vision and kind of North Star around that, which is interesting. But it largely starts with having a relationship with your audience where you can understand and connect with them on a regular basis. When you look at really getting direct information from audiences, both quantitative and qualitatively, are there any tools or tactics that you currently use or have used over the past, whether it's surveys or just search behavior or engagement data? What are some of the more effective tactics that you've used to get at meaningful data that can allow you to have a unique position that matters both to the brand and the audience?
Yeah, I think you have to use everything. Yeah, everything from in-depth interviews, ethnographies where you spend a day in the life or even weeks with people one-on-one observing how they live their lives and interact with products in your category, to on the other end of the spectrum, national quantitative studies with thousands and thousands of participants. You're not going to get the real granular magic unless you're with a person for a long period of time to really see how they live. But then it's hard to know if that's something that can be extrapolated or projected onto the general population unless you do more of a quantitative study to see those insights. We do a mix of them. And go back to Food Network days, one of the insights that helped us understand that we needed to be doing more entertainment programming and less how-to programming was from ethnographies of actually spending a day in the life of a person who was watching television and cooking and eating and seeing how those activities connected in real life. What we noticed was after about 6:30, after people had made dinner, there was no more interest in food in people's lives. After they washed the dishes, except for that midnight snack, you're not really thinking about food again until breakfast. So any food TV that would be telling you how to do things would certainly not have any interest. In the daytime, especially early afternoon, if you're a person who's at home, you're thinking about, when I run out to the grocery store and grab something, what am I going to make for dinner? Or even in the morning, what am I going to put in my kid's lunchbox? You're in a totally different mind space. And so that even helped us realize that most of TV viewing, though, takes place at night, and most TV advertising revenue is generated at night. But if people are not thinking about what we do at night, then maybe we got to do different kinds of TV shows at night than how to cook or what to go to the grocery store and get. But we wouldn't have really gotten that except by spending a day in the life with several consumers and watching how they, because people would tell us, "Oh, I love your brand. I love Food Network. Oh, no, no, you're great." And we're like, "Well, why aren't you watching at night? Why are our ratings so low? Why are we selling any advertising?" And you wouldn't see that unless you actually sat with a person and saw what was going on in their lives. So I think that, yeah, I found over the years in many situations that that sort of ethnography thing of actually watching how a person interacts with something is really the most valuable. It's just that it's really expensive and time consuming to do, but I get a lot more out of that than I do by looking at millions and millions of data points. People use the word data so much, like data, 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 and I think it's like, Okay, so a bunch of IP addresses and email address, some website visit behavior. That doesn't really tell me about who Dan is and what's his life like and what does he do in the morning when he's taking his kid to school and what's he thinking about in the afternoon. You need the other techniques to get that richness.
Yeah. What's interesting from a brand standpoint is the direct access to people, right? So a lot of brands, especially B2B brands, like you have a lot of access to customers, and chances are within your organization, you have people that would be your customers if they weren't working there. So it's interesting to mine for those stories. I would imagine, correct me if I'm wrong, but going into those moments or those interactions with audiences or potential audiences requires you to open your mind a little, which can be hard as marketers when you're like, all right, I have to communicate this piece and I have to figure out how to do it. When what you're saying is seek to understand, like, how do we look at how people might be valuing or interacting with us differently and use that insight to create some sort of spark of magic or something unique or interesting. And if you can do that, you might land on something that really is going to hit home with your audiences. Would you agree with that, or did I get that wrong?
Yeah, I think this goes way back to when I was just starting in marketing as an account executive at Young and Rubicam, and I worked on a product called Certs Candies, which is Certs is like a breath mint candy. And it was getting into the what's the essence of why people want to use that product. And the thought was that people ate mints because it's a candy that you eat like lifesavers. Their tagline was, it's a part of living. It's just something soothing to eat or taste. There was also the feeling that maybe people use breath mints because they feel more confident in social interactions with breath mints. But what we found in really talking to consumers and watching consumers, it was even deeper than that for a lot of people. It was about having social confidence and how empowering that social confidence could be to changing your life. And so we tapped into that with a campaign called Letters, where it was users of the product writing in saying, "You'll never believe what happened to me, this amazing encounter that I had today. I was in a cab and this amazingly beautiful or handsome guy sat down. He thought it was his cab too. And normally I would have jumped out if I would have felt confident with myself, but I turned to him and said, hey, let's just share the cab together. And because I had a certs, I just felt more comfortable and confident being in the back seat with another person." And it tapped into deeper insight than we would have normally been able to get through just top line data. Like, oh, well, search users just as much, they buy Tic Tacs or they buy Lifesavers, they buy Spearmint versus Wintergreen, or all the data that you normally get just from the regular MRI data. That insight about what a breath mint means in someone's life is something you really have to dig to get at.
Yeah, what's interesting there, and really about the totality of the conversation, is audiences will flock to you if a not only they can relate to the product, but almost like they can see themselves in the stories that you're telling versus this kind of flat communication style going out there. You're really starting to create something that includes people. And to do that, you have to understand them and have empathy and step back. But you also have to start thinking about how you do that in really connected ways across all the channels that you're creating, which is really hard. And it's almost the opposite of how organizations are set up. So if you look at any large marketing team, it's so siloed with individual content centers, whether it's thought leadership or web or social or product marketing or customer marketing or demand gen and account-based marketing. Like, all these touch points are all handled completely separately. And in a lot of cases, none of these teams ever talk to each other, which I would imagine has some parallels in the NPR world, where you have all these individual shows that are going at the mission of educating the public and creating a more informed public, but none of them can do that as individuals. So if you're trying to solve that problem as a CMO of like, how can I make sure all of my content not only satisfies like that engagement that I need in the moment, but works together to create a platform where I am the trusted authority on this subject matter or for this audience. Like, how do you balance the small interaction with the large vision for really crafting a meaningful position overall?
Yeah, I think that people talk about the silo problem and they think that the solution is to put everybody in the same department. I think that it's more about getting people to have a shared understanding of the problem you're trying to solve and have shared values and the shared objectives, but you don't have to work in the same department. The biggest, or extreme example would be, the United States, a very diverse and scattered country, but we do share certain core values that allow us to be a nation. So I think the key thing for a CMO or for any leader is to help establish what that vision needs to be and what those core values around achieving that vision need to be. And then spend a lot of time trying to communicate and over communicate that to people across the organization. One of the things I spend a ton of my time on, just being an evangelist for the bigger picture strategy to people across the company. And so whether you're working in podcast creation, website creation, social video creation, advertising creative, IT, or the HR team that's interviewing new employees and onboarding employees, everybody is speaking the same language about what our strategy is as an organization, what our values are as an organization. If you do that, then in fact, I think even better not to have a centralized team because you allow multiple expressions of that vision through different teams that each find their own unique way to express that.
That's great. So really, as you think about this, we're talking a lot about recipes. As you think about the recipe here for success, it's really narrowing in on that voice, understanding how and why that voice translates to the customer, building a North Star of the vision, what you have to say, what our core values are, how do we operate, and how are we thinking about our role in that know, understand, feel, do universe, like where are we playing? And then ultimately, to your point, then having the ability to tie that as a brand, you have the business responsibility to tie that to outcomes. So when I get them engaged, how can I drive brand affinity, loyalty, and ultimately a measurable bottom line back into the business, which becomes incredibly important if we all want to keep working. Otherwise, you get that tap on your shoulder and say, hey, I love the story, but like, what's going on over here? Are you making art or are we driving the business? So did I get that right? Is there anything that's off base there in your mind?
There's always a tension or balance, as long as I've been in marketing, between people will say brand and performance or image and sales. You had David Ocker on in an earlier podcast, and he's one of the fathers of brand identity and this whole idea that there is a value to this bigger thing called brand, which people before really focused more on just selling. Like, here's the offer, let's make the cash register ring. But the idea that the cash register might ring more if people have a sort of a uber perception of the brand, which helps put your brand even into consideration set before they even get to the cash register part. So I think as a CMO, you're always doing that dance between we need people to have a good perception of the brand itself so that they will be more likely to actually transact and convert. In television, when I worked in cable television, one of the things that I would try to communicate to people was that we want people to have an expectation of what they will find on the channel before they even get to the channel. So they will just pick our channel first. If we're in a competitive world with 80, 100 channels on the dial, if they just see our logo or name, they just have an expectation in their mind that this is what might be on right now, even though if they haven't gone there, that gives you a leg up. And so that's what the brand is all about. When you hear the name HBO or when you hear Bravo or whatever channel, that's why it's so key to have that brand perception. And I think in the streaming TV world, it's the same thing. You have a perception of what you may not have the Netflix app open, but you have a perception in your mind that when you open it, there's probably going to be something that you're going to want to watch. That's what Netflix is trying to do with their brand. So there's also promotion about a specific show, like tune into the show tonight or stream this right now because of this. And so I think you have to do both. When there's pressure to show immediate results, the economy's, there's a slowdown, you're looking for revenue numbers, there's shareholder pressure. Oftentimes people will put a pause on the brand work and go really hard on the performance work to bump numbers. But the problem with that is that then you may bump numbers in the short term with kind of your core consumers, but you're not out there evangelizing to the next generation of consumers and building brand perceptions. So it can cost you down the road.
That's really important guidance as we think about this particular environment. Question about this environment. I've heard your perspective on the role of brands just in general in society. Should we have a voice in some of these more non-business oriented, but really important societal topics? Should brands play a role or should they not play a role? And even a few years ago, there was almost an imperative where you had to. And now the pendulum's almost swung the other direction where brands can almost get punished for having a voice outside of what their sort of core revenue objective and business objectives are. And there's a really lot of caution or complexity in this environment. Like, any advice for brands as having that social component to the brand? Should we stay away from it? Should we rethink it? Should it be a part of it? What's your take there?
Well, I think the data still says that consumers overall still, especially younger consumers, want their brands to be something they can feel proud to be associated with. So the values of a brand matter, and a brand's involvement in community and societal issues matter to people. I think the issue is how you do it and where you do it, and is it the right place for you to play? And I think one of the things that happened back in 2020 and 2021 was a lot of people just started weighing in and chiming in what I would say performative ways rather than in more authentic, organic ways. And I think the public saw that, and that's where you're getting the backlash. So I think you had a combination of everybody jumping on the bandwagon of having BLM on their Instagram page or whatever, and not really doing anything other than that to make a difference in society. So people being cynical about how that happened. And then on the other side, you had a lot of people taking this virtue signaling too far to the fact that, well, if you're not virtue signaling with me, then something's wrong with you, and then I'm going to cancel you, and you're this. And then there was this overreach. And I think that's led to now there's always a yin and the yang, where you see now the anti-DEI stuff, where I thought people who were just annoyed by how over the top it went, in their view, are now pushing back, maybe too much the other way. And to me, I think it's sad because, especially as a person of color, as a Black person, I feel like so much of this has been elite people who are not in the community that needs help fighting back and forth. So you have a Robin DiAngelo or a person writing a book about whites feeling fragility and guilt. And then you have Christopher Rufo on the other side fighting back. And neither one of these people probably has any connection to Hispanic community or the Black community, or helping young Black kids with their homework after school, or helping young Black mothers get school lunch program. The things that really will make a difference in the world, not a bunch of uppity white liberal people and conservative people yelling about what DEI means. So I just look at it with a little bit of sadness, because the core goal of creating a more inclusive America and making the American dream more accessible to more of our citizens, which we've been trying to do since 1776, that goal is still there. And I think people still believe in it. And I think if companies can find organic ways to be part of that expansion of the American dream, I think that's very authentic. But when you get into these performative things that are easy for people to poke holes at, that causes all kinds of problems. So I say, just do the work. I think that's what companies need to just do the work. Praise is always better received when it comes from someone else. When people talk about the good things you do, it's always more credible than when you talk about it. So I think the device companies, just do the work. You will get media coverage or in media about it. Other people will talk about how great your company is, rather than you going out and doing all this marketing about how you're so down with this community, you're down with that community.
Yeah. Yeah. So don't just do the logo swap during whatever monthly theme you have, and then move on and do nothing about it. That probably isn't a great strategy, if I hear you right.
It doesn't work with the core audience. I think it works maybe with some people, elite people, and maybe people that are your peers. You think, oh, it's cool. Yeah, we were supported this, we supported that. But the people who really, out in the real world, they see through that.
We've talked a lot about storytelling, and I want to dig into AI. So AI's removed the barrier for virtually anybody to create content at scale, but it also removed the barrier to anybody creating really crappy content at scale too. And what we're talking about is connecting with people requires a level of human insight and scale, which doesn't necessarily lend itself to hitting a button and getting a blog post or something like that. On the flip side, if you're not leveraging AI, there's a good chance, especially you're sort of entire career path has been this blend of storytelling, technology, media, audience development, you're probably going to get left behind. So can you help us in the marketing community understand your perspective on the role of AI in building these human connections? Like, is there friction there, or does that give us some sort of leg up? And if so, where?
Every time there's a new technology, there's some people that are always saying, oh, it's going to make crappy content and it's going to do this and it's not authentic, it's not real. And I think sometimes that's maybe just fear of change or wanting to protect what was there before. I remember I was a big fan of the TV show Mad Men, and they showed in that show the rise of television advertising. Because when the show first started I think it was set in the late 50s, early 60s, and most advertising was print and radio and outdoor. The TV hadn't come yet. And the guy in the show who was the TV guy at the agency was put in a tiny little office and was teased and wasn't taken seriously. He goes, oh, it's just TV stuff. What's that? That's not real advertising. So I think it's the same thing that people are saying, oh, AI, it's not real. It's fake. It's this, it's crappy. But we've seen historically that new format becomes the norm. It becomes the way people interact. And that's what they believe is authentic. It's like when people started using drum machines or electronic instruments. And people, oh, that's not real. Those aren't real musicians. Or when people started rapping in songs, they aren't singers or using auto-tune. But that becomes the new form. So I think these AI tools will become the tools people will use, just like people use drum machines and digital animation to make Pixar movies. It's early days because we're just a couple of years into this and people are just figuring out how to use the tools. And so some of the early versions are rough and rudimentary and not great, but I would project in 4 or 5 years, we'll have just as we have fantastic electronic rap music, we're going to have fantastically generative AI created movies and TV shows and things made by really creative, artistic people. People say, oh, it's just push a button. Yeah, but it's never been push a button using any technology. You're Kanye West, who everything he does is electronic and sampled and synthesized, but he doesn't just push a button. He takes all these technological tools and creates amazing music. So there'll be people who take amazing generative AI tools and craft amazing art with them. And so I think as a marketer, the key is to understand that there's always this tension between authenticity and technologies. You don't want to be too far ahead in the game where you're using the technology in ways that your audience thinks is inauthentic, but you don't want to be so cautious that you wait too long until everybody believes that this technology is authentic and you haven't even done anything in it. So you have to walk that line. So like we see that even in audio, cloned voices, are they considered authentic or are they not considered authentic? I think we're at the bleeding edge or whatever you call it now, where I think most people would not consider a radio news broadcast done by a cloned voice or a generated voice to be authentic because it's new. We're not used to that. So that's probably too early. But think about now, most people are pretty comfortable with generated voices to do pretty simple informational tasks, whether it's Siri or Alexa telling me on my GPS, giving me turn-by-turn directions. Nobody goes, oh my God, that's a fake voice. That's not authentic. I can't turn there. That's a fake voice telling me that. It's like, it's just fine.
Yeah.
So I'm sure in the time, a fake voice telling me who won the election or a fake voice telling me what happened in the Yankee game yesterday will be fine.
And as we think about that, again, it puts pressure on kind of what you do around that technology, right? So we're starting to think through what is our position, how do we connect better, and how do we use technology to scale that position? And to your point, there isn't a magic button, but if you're not using the button at all, you're probably going to be at a disadvantage in the future and probably the near future, given how quickly things are accelerating. My last question here is, as a marketing leader, you've been at the forefront of a lot of these sort of tech leaps. If even thinking of the role of technology and marketing and media in the 1980s, just really building an arc and a career around that. So when you think in the next 3 to 5 years and you're a marketer, what are some of the skills and what are some things you need to be doing now to set yourself up for a future that's coming so that you can A, be present in the moment that we're having right now, but B, kind of future proof yourself so you can get ahead of the curve as you think about what's about to come? Do you have any advice there?
I tell this to college students all the time that you never stop learning. Most of your career is going to be in that area of working on things that you probably haven't even thought of in your mind. It's our job to connect people to those products and services and give them the information they need to make the best decision. And whether you're doing that through AI or 50 years ago through newspapers or 100 years ago through handbills nailed to a tree, the function hasn't changed. The insights of having to understand your audience and how you fit into their life will never change. So I think if you have that basic, curiosity about people and what makes them tick and how to connect them to goods and services, that will serve you as the tools and technology to connect people will continue to explode and evolve, and who knows where that will go.
Amazing. Michael, great insights today. We really appreciate you as a marketer and how you're giving back to the community here in lots of other ways. Thank you and appreciate your time today.
It's a really fun conversation. I have enjoyed just getting to know the podcast and listening to a couple of episodes so far. Now I'm a follower, so it's a real honor to be part of it.
Amazing. Thanks again. Thank you for listening to Content Disrupted, brought to you by Skyward. To stay up to date on the latest ideas and insights in brand building and content marketing, visit our website at skyward.com. That's skyword.com. Join us for our next episode, where we'll continue to challenge marketing norms and inspire you with fresh strategies for growing business through brand storytelling.